So here's a question for you. If you knew God was going to start moving in a new and powerful and noticeable way, if you had been told that there was coming a day when God would sweep into history and break in some powerful, observable, new direction, would you be excited for it? Would you be afraid of it? Would you be scared? Would you be happy? Would you assume that God would only do things to help reinforce your agenda and your wishes? Or would there be the possibility God might turn all of your expectations upside down? That question, that loaded question about what it means to look for the day of the Lord, for the day that God acts, that's exactly where Amos is going to take us this week in our session of Good Trouble. Once again, this week we find Amos trying to find new ways to get through to an audience that is so complacent, so insulated from difficulty, so comfortable that it can't imagine that God might want to come in and shake things up among them. As we get into Amos chapter 5 today, once again, we find Amos addressing people who think of God as sort of being in their back pocket, that their lives are pretty comfortable and prosperous, and they assume that must be a sign of God's favor on them. And therefore, if God was going to act in a new way, God was going to do something even more powerful, of course, that would be to make their lives even better, even richer, their borders even larger, and things more prosperous. People who were living in a so-called golden age in Amos's day imagined that God only wanted the golden age to be better and better for them and only them. And so there's this popular thinking that when the day of the Lord, the day of Yahweh comes, well, it'll be to make things even better for us. Amos comes along and goes, why would you assume that? Why would you assume that God is just here to make things better for just you and your little group? And in fact, if God's upset about the ways that you are cheating each other, hurting each other, pushing people to the side, taking advantage of others, ignoring the needs of the poor, when God steps in to act in a new way, it's going to shake all your comfortable way of life down to the foundations. Amos has to say the day of the Lord isn't something that's going to be exciting or happy for you all. It's going to be a table-turning, surprising kind of action when God sets things right again. Not all that different from the way Mary, the mother of Jesus, would later sing about God acting in history to raise up the lowly and take the humble or take the proud down off their thrones, to fill the hungry with good things and send the rich away empty. If you're the hungry person, if you're the one who's struggling, if you're the one who's been stepped on for so long, it sounds good news to hear that. But if you are comfortable with the way things are and you don't want God coming and shaking things up, the notion of the day of the Lord sounds kind of scary. Amos brings yet another wake-up call. We're going to discover too this week that part of that wake-up call is how easily the people in Amos's day picture if they worship God following the rituals the right way, if they bring their festivals and sing the prayers and the songs and do all those ritual things right, then God will continue to be in their back pocket, and God has to give them blessing or favor if they worship God following every rubric in the hymnal. And Amos, again, speaking for God, says, God reserves the right not to accept your worship, God to accept your prayer. God reserves the right to cover God's ears if your worship is just a cover for taking advantage of other people. God, once again, speaking through Amos, says, what I've always really been after was that you would practice justice so abundantly that it flowed like waters, that you would be righteous, that you would do right by each other so abundantly that it would flow like streams of water. In other words, once again, Amos has to tell the people, God is not our genie or our mascot or something in our back pocket that we have power over. God is always the one in control, and God reserves the right to shake things up for any of us and all of us. And if we've fallen asleep, if we've gotten complacent, if we've turned our comfortable life situation into a way that I don't have to deal with the needs of other people, or I don't have to think about how somebody else is suffering because of my comfort or my abundance, if that's my way of life, when God comes and steps into history and acts in a new way, it will shake things up. That will be uncomfortable, even if it's also deeply good at the same time. That's the challenge for Amos. He's got to be able to tell people God's going to do something that will make us uncomfortable, and yet it will be deeply good because finally it puts things right the right way. In a lot of ways, Amos's words that sound like warning are the before side to Mary's song in the Gospel of Luke, who sees that in Jesus, God has done something to lift up the lowly, feed the hungry with good things, and take the powerful and the tyrants down off of their overinflated pedestals. That really is good news if you want the world to be put right. And ultimately, that's what Amos is about. A world put right, starting even from the circle of the people of God. So I hope you'll join us this Thursday for a deep dive into Amos chapter 5 in our continuing series this summer, Good Trouble, as we study the book of Amos and what it means for our lives today. See you then.